I was born into a quiet suburb, surrounded by neat lawns, white picket fences, and two-story houses that looked almost identical. As a child, I thought my family was just like any other. My mother would cook dinner in the evenings, humming to herself as she stirred the pot of stew, while my father read the newspaper in the living room, occasionally calling out interesting headlines. My older sister, Rochelle, would lounge on the couch, flipping through television channels or texting her friends. I remember feeling a sense of belonging, a belief that this was normal life, simple, safe, and consistent. That illusion shattered around the time I started high school. I was 14, scrawny, shy, and desperate for my sister's approval. Rochelle was 2 years older, tall, and effortlessly popular. Everyone seemed drawn to her bright smile and confident stride. She had an infectious laugh that would ring out in the hallways at school, and all eyes would turn her way. I recall thinking she was everything I wanted to be, but behind that magnetic exterior lurked a cruelty that I, at first, could not see. It began with small jabs, like her criticizing the way I dressed or how I styled my hair. She would say, "You look so dorky," in front of her friends, and they would all burst into laughter. I tried to laugh along sometimes, just to fit in, but it stung. Rochelle claimed she was teasing me for my own good, that she was toughening me up for the real world. I hoped that if I just endured these jabs quietly, she would eventually accept me. But the teasing morphed into something more destructive. When I was 15, Rochelle started spreading rumors around school. It began with a simple story that I was stealing money from my parents. Then she started telling people I had cheated on exams. These false tales gained traction, especially when they came from her influential circle. I felt the walls closing in every time I stepped onto the school bus, every time I heard whispers in the cafeteria, every time I struggled to explain to a teacher that, no, I hadn't stolen or cheated. My parents dismissed the chatter as part of normal teenage drama. "You two should learn to get along," was all they'd say, casually reading the mail or flipping channels. They never got involved or tried to find out the truth. In their eyes, Rochelle and I were just sisters going through a rocky phase. But it wasn't just rumors. Rochelle moved on to humiliation in front of my friends. She'd barge into my room, rummage through my things, and hold up personal items in front of whoever happened to be there, mocking me with a shrill giggle. If I wrote down any private thoughts in a journal, she would find it and read it out loud just to see me squirm. My father shrugged, telling me, "She's your sister. You'll patch things up eventually," while my mother, in her infinite dispassion, told me to stand up for myself or learn to ignore it. There was no champion in my corner, no parent stepping in to shield me. I felt alone. During that period, I developed coping mechanisms. I threw myself into reading, escaping into novels where heroes overcame daunting challenges. I often pictured myself as one of those characters, quiet, misunderstood, forced to endure hardship until a triumphant moment arrived. I read and reread stories of redemption and revenge, feeding my inner desire to someday prove myself worthy in the eyes of those who looked down on me. One evening, when I was 16, I found my science project, one that was crucial for my final grade, completely destroyed. The model I had painstakingly built was smashed to pieces. Glue and paint were scattered across my desk, as if someone had taken deliberate pleasure in tearing everything apart. I knew it was Rochelle. I could see it in her smug smirk as she passed by my room that night. I confronted her, voice trembling with anger and heartbreak, but she just brushed me off. "Stop whining," she said. "Nobody cares about your stupid project." I marched down to the living room, tears streaking my cheeks, and demanded that my parents do something. My mother looked up from a recipe magazine and gave a half-hearted sigh. My father merely blinked from behind his newspaper. "Let's not have fights so late in the evening," he mumbled. Anger boiled in me, a kind of fury I had never felt before, seeing how easily they dismissed my desperation. Rochelle walked down the stairs behind me, standing there with her arms crossed, a slight curl on her lips that resembled a satisfied grin. I realized at that moment that in this house I was invisible. My pain, my struggle, my pleas, they fell on deaf ears. I retreated to my room, bitter tears burning my eyes. That night, lying in bed, I made a promise to myself I would get out. As soon as I turned 18, I would leave this place and never look back. The following 2 years passed in excruciating slowness. Every day was a new slight, a new rumor, a new attempt by Rochelle to assert her dominance over me. If I tried to hide my prized possessions, she'd spend extra energy finding them just to ruin them. If I made new friends, she'd launch into stories about how pathetic I was, aiming to turn them away from me. I knew my parents wouldn't come to my defense. They just sighed and told me to be the bigger person. That phrase, repeated so often, became a hollow mantra I started to despise. On the day of my 18th birthday, I quietly packed my few belongings, some clothes, a handful of books, and precious photos of the times when I still believed my family was normal. I approached a military recruiter a few months earlier, explaining that I wanted to enlist right after graduation. I was ready to escape, ready to claim a life that wasn't overshadowed by Rochelle's malice or my parents' indifference. Graduation day came and went. My parents attended the ceremony, applauding politely from the bleachers, while Rochelle sat among her friends. I stood on that stage, cap on my head, diploma in my hand, and promised myself that this would be the last time I felt so powerless. 2 weeks later, I left that suburban house at dawn, stepping into a car sent by the recruiting office. My mother slept in, not even bothering to say goodbye. My father gave me a perfunctory wave, as if I were merely going on a short trip. Rochelle, of course, was nowhere to be seen. A numbness settled over me as the car pulled away. I didn't look back. In my mind, I was already carving a new future, one in which I'd rise far beyond their low expectations. Basic training was a rude awakening, but in a strangely comforting way. For the first time, people around me cared about what I did, not who I was related to. I was judged for my resilience, my effort, my teamwork. Drill instructors were harsh, barking orders that made me tremble at first, but their discipline was clear-cut and fair. If you messed up, you faced consequences. If you excelled, you got recognized. It was a system I'd never experienced before, one that rewarded real merit. I thrived under the structure, pushing myself harder every day. I woke up at dawn for runs, learned to navigate obstacle courses, and discovered a sense of camaraderie with my fellow recruits. We sweated, bled, and struggled together, forming a bond that felt far more genuine than anything I ever had with Rochelle. I still remember the moment I completed the final challenge, a long endurance test through muddy fields under a scorching sun. My muscles screamed, my lungs burned, but I kept going. Each step felt like an act of defiance against all those who had belittled me. When I crossed the finish line, collapsing onto the ground with dirt covering my face, I felt a cathartic surge of pride. For the first time, I believed I was strong. Graduation from basic training was emotional. I saw tears in the eyes of my fellow recruits, tears of achievement and relief. In my own chest, I felt a swelling of triumph. Looking around, I realized my parents weren't there, and Rochelle definitely wasn't going to show up. This time, though, it didn't hurt like it used to. I was proud of myself, with or without my family's presence. Over the next few years, I rose through the ranks, steadily earning the respect of my superiors. I specialized in communications, learning intricate codes and sophisticated equipment. Long hours and difficult missions turned me into someone I hardly recognized. I could navigate through harsh terrain, maintain focus under gunfire simulations, and lead small teams in critical exercises. My peers looked to me for guidance, and my officers commended my leadership qualities. Each new achievement chipped away at the memories of my old life, forging me into a new, confident person. Outside of training, I spent my free time studying. I took online courses in psychology, partly because I wanted to understand people like Rochelle, those who torment others for their own amusement. Through my studies, I began to see her bullying as a manifestation of her own insecurities. Perhaps she feared losing control, or maybe she saw me as a convenient scapegoat for her frustrations. Regardless of her motives, I came to a deep conviction. I was better off away from that toxic environment. My determination hardened. If they never reached out, I might be able to forgive them from a distance, focusing on myself without letting them drag me down again. But fate has a way of circling back. 8 years passed without a single call from my parents, no letters, no birthday cards, nothing. My sister's voice was just a bitter echo in my mind, something I heard only in nightmares. Then, on a muggy afternoon when I was in the middle of an overseas deployment, My phone buzzed unexpectedly. The number was unfamiliar but had the area code of my hometown. A tense feeling overcame me as I stepped away from the group to answer the call. On the other end was my father, speaking in that same monotone I remembered. He asked how I'd been. He tried to make small talk, as if we were simply old acquaintances catching up. My heart pounded, years of resentment and pain surfacing like a tidal wave. I listened in silence, waiting for him to get to the point. Finally, his voice wavered slightly. "We miss you," he said. "Your mother has been asking about you a lot lately." I heard a faint shuffle in the background, as if my mother were indeed leaning in, wanting to say something but lacking the courage. I wanted to laugh and scream at the same time. Where was this concern 8 years ago? Where was this curiosity during my basic training graduation or any of my birthdays? Before I could gather my thoughts, my father continued, "We'd really like you to come home for a visit. It's been so long." Every syllable scraped at my consciousness, rekindling those old wounds. My father's tone was almost pleading, a stark contrast to the indifference he'd shown for most of my life. I didn't say yes. I told him I needed time to think. The idea of returning to that house made my stomach churn, yet a part of me also felt an odd flicker of longing. After all, they were my family, even if they had never been a good one. Could people really change so drastically? Could they realize their mistakes after nearly a decade of silence? I hung up, promising to call back when I was stateside again. For the next few weeks, I was consumed by a whirlpool of emotions. My bunkmates noticed my distraction. A close friend, Corporal Jennings, asked me if something was wrong. Jennings was a straightforward guy, always ready to listen. I confided in him about my conflicted feelings, about how my family suddenly wanted me back in the fold after ignoring me for so many years. He shrugged, giving me a thoughtful look. "Sometimes, people don't realize what they have until they lose it," he said. "But sometimes, they never change at all." That statement stayed with me. I spent nights replaying old memories. Rochelle mocking me in the hallway, my mother flipping through channels as I begged for help, my father dismissing me with a bored wave. Did they truly regret pushing me away, or was there another motive? I thought of all the stories I'd heard about parents suddenly reaching out when they discovered their child was successful or had money. I did have a comfortable savings now and a stable career. My cynicism grew, making me suspicious of their intentions. And then there was Rochelle. The idea of facing her again made my blood run cold. Had she changed? Was she still the manipulative bully I once knew? The memory of her smug face, the triumphant look she wore whenever she reduced me to tears, still haunted me. I told myself I was a different person now, stronger and more confident. But some scars from childhood never fully fade. Eventually, I concluded that I needed to see them, if only to lay old ghosts to rest. Holding on to anger was like dragging a heavy chain around my ankles. I decided that I would visit, briefly, and evaluate the situation in person. If they truly wanted to mend fences, I would give them that chance. If it turned out to be a ploy, I'd walk away forever with no second thoughts. When I rotated back to the States, I made arrangements to take a short leave. The flight back to my hometown felt surreal, like stepping onto a different planet after all these years. The memories of that place, both good and bad, flooded my mind as the plane descended. I recalled the local ice cream parlor, the old movie theater, the park with its worn-out swing set. I also recalled the nights I spent crying in my room, wondering why I was never good enough for my own family. My father offered to pick me up from the airport. That in itself was a novelty. I couldn't remember the last time he'd gone out of his way for me. I walked through the arrivals gate, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, scanning the crowd for his familiar face. When I finally spotted him, I felt a jolt of recognition. The same neatly combed hair, the same slightly stooped posture, the same benign expression. He waved awkwardly. We shook hands, an oddly formal gesture for a father and son who hadn't seen each other in nearly a decade. He said, "Good to see you," in a tone suggesting he wasn't sure if that was true or just what he was supposed to say. I replied in kind, forcing a small smile. Tension coiled in the air, thick enough to slice with a knife. The drive back to my childhood home was filled with stilted attempts at conversation. He asked about my career, the places I'd been, the medals I'd earned. I answered politely, withholding the deeper emotions swirling inside me. I asked about my mother, about Rochelle. He told me Rochelle was in a tough spot, that life hadn't turned out quite the way she'd planned. Something about job losses, a failed marriage, and money troubles. A strange heaviness settled in my chest, a mix of pity and cautious satisfaction. There was a younger version of me that might have exulted in her downfall, but the older, more seasoned version just felt tired. As we pulled into the driveway of the old house, I felt my heart pound. The porch still had the squeaky wooden swing, the lawn looked a bit overgrown, and the windows needed a fresh coat of paint. My mother rushed out before the car fully stopped, her eyes suspiciously bright, as though she'd been crying. She hugged me tight, whispering, "I missed you so much." The irony struck me. She had missed me in her own, distant way, apparently enough to never pick up the phone until now. Inside, everything looked eerily familiar. The worn sofa, the chipped coffee table, the same photos on the mantel. In one of them, Rochelle and I stood side by side, both wearing forced smiles. I remember that day, how she pinched my arm right after the photo was taken, just out of the camera's sight. The memory made me shudder. My mother ushered me into the kitchen, offering me something to eat as if that could erase the last 8 years of neglect. She kept stealing glances at me, as if afraid I might vanish again. My father set my duffel bag in the hallway, muttering, "We made up your room, just like it was." I doubted that was true. I assumed it had been converted into storage or a guest room. But I just nodded. Then Rochelle appeared, stepping into the kitchen from the back door. At first, I barely recognized her. She looked worn down, dark circles under her eyes, hair dull and unkempt. Yet, there was something in her gaze, a flicker of defiance, or perhaps shame. She offered a tentative hello. I stood, not sure whether to extend my hand or open my arms for a hug. In the end, we just hovered awkwardly, two siblings separated by years of animosity. She finally spoke. "It's good to see you," she said quietly, glancing away. I couldn't tell if she meant it. The first evening passed in an uneasy dance. We had dinner together. My mother had gone all out, making roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a casserole, and a pie. It was a feast far grander than any she ever made before I left. Part of me wanted to resent it, to see it as an empty gesture, but another part of me felt a small tug of appreciation. Conversations were forced, questions about the military, about my travels, about how different life was overseas. My father tried to steer the topic away from anything too personal or painful, while Rochelle remained mostly silent, sipping her drink and pushing food around her plate. Before bed, my mother caught me in the hallway, laying a hand on my shoulder. "I know we haven't been perfect," she said softly, her eyes brimming with tears. "But we're really glad you're here. Maybe we can start over." Her voice quivered. For a split second, I glimpsed the fragile thread of regret that might have gnawed at her for years. I gave a non-committal nod, not wanting to commit to forgiveness just yet. That night, in the old room they prepared, I found my bed was made with fresh sheets, a small vase of flowers on the nightstand. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, remembering the nights I'd cried myself to sleep in that very bed. My anger simmered, my heart clenched with nostalgia, but also confusion. Could I just pretend everything was okay? That they hadn't pushed me aside for so long? Early the next morning, I rose before the sun, as I did in the military. Slipping out of the house, I went for a run through the old neighborhood. Passing the high school felt surreal. My mind flooded with images of Rochelle's torment, the shame I felt under her cruel jokes, the frustration that no one helped me. I increased my pace, my feet pounding the pavement as if trying to outrun those memories. By the time I returned, Rochelle was sitting on the porch steps, a mug of coffee cradled in her hands. She glanced up as I approached, her eyes carrying some unspoken weight. "Morning," she said, voice low. I nodded, pausing near the steps, unsure if I should stay or just head inside. After a few moments of tense silence, she gestured for me to sit beside her. Reluctantly, I did. "V. You probably hate me," she started, looking at the ground. I didn't respond immediately. The bitterness in my chest was a testament to the resentment I felt. Still, some part of me, maybe the part that had grown older and wiser, wanted to hear her out. She sighed, exhaling a shaky breath. "I was awful. I know I was. I can't take it back, but I'm sorry. Truly." I stared at her, searching her face for deception. Why now? I asked quietly. It's been so many years. You never tried to contact me. Neither did they. I jerked my head toward the house, where my parents were undoubtedly eavesdropping from a window. She swallowed hard. I was in a bad place. After high school, I thought life would be a breeze. I had friends, popularity, everything seemed easy. But it all crumbled. I made mistakes, big ones. My marriage fell apart, I lost my job, and I realized that I had burned every bridge I had. The more I tried to rebuild, the more I saw how I'd treated you. I understood the kind of person I'd been. Her voice trembled, and for a moment, I glimpsed the vulnerability behind her once impenetrable mask. I wanted to reach out, but I was ashamed, she continued. I didn't know what to say, and I assumed you wouldn't pick up the phone anyway. Then Dad found out you were doing well, earning rank, saving money. He got to thinking maybe it was time to call you, but I couldn't even bring myself to ask for your number. There it was, the admission I'd suspected. They reached out after discovering I had made something of myself. A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. So, you found out I'm financially stable, and now you want me back in the family. Is that it? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She flinched. It's not about money, I swear. She trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. I can't expect you to forgive me, but I do want to try to fix this, if there's any chance at all. I studied her for a moment. She seemed genuinely remorseful, though I wasn't sure if it was out of regret for her actions or regret for her own hardships. Perhaps it was both. Part of me wanted to stand up and walk away, to keep the cold distance I had maintained for so many years. But another part of me longed for some sense of closure, maybe even a sliver of reconciliation. I told her I'd think about it. The day stretched on with uncomfortable interactions. My parents hovered around me, occasionally offering awkward smiles or attempts at conversation. They tiptoed, clearly aware that one wrong move might send me packing. I considered leaving that very afternoon, but something held me there, a desire to see if they were capable of genuine change. That evening, we sat around the living room, flicking through old photo albums. My mother insisted on showing me pictures of childhood vacations, birthdays, and holiday gatherings. Rochelle stared at the images, silent tears rolling down her cheeks as she saw the younger versions of us, me always in the background, overshadowed by her radiant presence. My father had a faraway look, as if mentally rewriting history to replace the tension with fond memories. It was all so surreal. I watched them react to these photos with regret and nostalgia, but the gulf between us remained. I saw the moment when I was 6 years old, wearing a paper crown for my birthday, with a beaming smile that I remembered Rochelle wiping away minutes later by telling me the crown looked ridiculous. The camera had captured only half the story. My heart ached, and I wondered, could I find it in me to let go of the pain? Before bed, my father pulled me aside. He cleared his throat, avoiding eye contact. I know we failed you, he said, voice shaking slightly. I was just caught up in work, and I thought your mother would handle things. It wasn't an excuse, but that's how it was. He looked older, more fragile, a man realizing too late that life doesn't wait for you to get your priorities straight. I nodded, not really trusting myself to speak. His sincerity seemed real, but it didn't erase years of neglect. I told him I needed time and that I didn't want to make any decisions yet. He nodded, clapped me gently on the shoulder, and trudged upstairs, shoulders slumped. I remained downstairs for a while, listening to the old house creak, lost in thought. In the days that followed, I stayed in my hometown, trying to reacquaint myself with the streets and landmarks that once felt suffocating. I visited the public library where I spent countless afternoons escaping into books during high school. The librarian recognized me, greeting me with surprise. We chatted about my travels, about the changes around town. She admitted she'd heard rumors I'd joined the military right after graduation, but no one really knew where I'd gone or what I'd done. I realized how thoroughly I had cut myself off. Word spread quickly that I was back. Old classmates reached out on social media, some curious, some friendly. A few wanted to catch up, to hear war stories, or see if I had changed. I agreed to meet a couple of them at a local cafe. They asked me about my experiences, wide-eyed at my descriptions of the training and the places I'd seen overseas. Some apologized for believing Rochelle's lies back in the day. I accepted their apologies with a polite shrug, feeling a twinge of bitterness. They were kids then, swayed by high school cliques and gossip. People grow up, I told myself. Hopefully for the better. At night, I found myself talking more with Rochelle. She opened up about her divorce, how she got involved with a man she thought was her ticket to a perfect life. Instead, she ended up trapped in a toxic relationship that drained her finances and self-esteem. She confessed to feeling powerless and alone, ironically reminiscent of the helplessness I had once felt. She took a shaky breath, tears shining in her eyes, and admitted she finally understood what it was like to have no one in your corner. A strange sense of empathy stirred within me. It didn't erase the pain she caused, but it made her more human in my eyes. The bully who tormented me was still there, but now I saw layers of regret, fear, and vulnerability. She asked me about the day I left, whether I had felt relief or loneliness. I told her it was both, that leaving felt like severing a part of myself I should have been able to rely on but never could. Rochelle nodded sadly, acknowledging her role in pushing me away. Meanwhile, my parents did their best to create a comfortable environment. My mother cooked elaborate meals, and my father made attempts at jokes he thought would break the tension. It was awkward, but it was also an effort, something I never saw from them before. They tiptoed around me, as though afraid of scaring me off. I, in turn, found myself softening, though only by small degrees. Walls built over years are not torn down in mere days. One afternoon, as Rochelle and I were tidying up the garage, we found a dusty cardboard box labeled with my name. Inside were scraps of school papers, a few old toys, and random items I'd thrown away in fits of anger. I saw an old essay I wrote about wanting to be a pilot, a clay model I'd made for an art class, half broken. Rochelle picked up a crumpled photo of me at 16, eyes downcast, face bruised from the time I fought off a group of bullies who'd picked on me after hearing Rochelle's rumors. She inhaled sharply, tears forming. "I didn't realize," she began, voice cracking. "I was so caught up in my own world. God, how could I do this to you?" I felt a lump in my throat. The photo brought back memories of that day, the shame, the pain, the overwhelming sense of betrayal that my own sister had set me up for humiliation. The anger resurfaced, hot and raw, but so did a profound sorrow. Rochelle sank onto an old wooden crate, holding the photo as tears spilled onto her cheeks. I stood there, uncertain, feeling a tumult of emotions swirling in my chest. Finally, I crouched down beside her. In a gentle tone, I said, "That's the person you were. I'd like to believe you're different now." The words felt simultaneously true and insufficient. She nodded, wiping her face. We lingered there, side by side, amidst forgotten relics of my painful adolescence, perhaps taking the first tentative steps toward understanding each other. That night, my father approached me again. We stood on the back porch, looking out at the patchy lawn under a moonlit sky. Fireflies flickered in the distance, reminiscent of summer nights long ago when I would watch them from my window, wishing I could float away. He cleared his throat, glancing down at his hands. "I owe you a real apology," he said quietly. "I let you slip away. I let your sister treat you terribly, and I pretended it was just kids being kids. It wasn't right." I nodded, my gaze fixed on the flicker of fireflies. "I needed you," I whispered, voice trembling. "I needed you and Mom to step in to protect me. But you didn't." "I know," he replied, eyes glistening. "No excuse can fix that. I just hope, someday, you can find a place in your heart to forgive me. And if not, I understand. I just wanted to say it. I'm sorry." We stood there for a moment, the air heavy with unspoken regrets. Tears wet my cheeks, and I didn't bother to hide them. Finally, I mustered the courage to look him in the eyes, searching for sincerity. All I saw was remorse. Maybe it was genuine. Maybe it was too late. But at least it was out there. In the days that followed, my family continued to show me kindness, humility, and a genuine desire to mend what was broken. Rochelle did small gestures, like leaving freshly laundered clothes on my bed or offering me a piece of the chocolate cake she baked. My mother hovered, fussing over me with the kind of worried affection I never saw when I was younger. My father tried to share jokes or news articles, attempting to bond in the limited ways he knew. Despite these efforts, the past loomed large. Each kind gesture was weighed against years of neglect. Every apology felt dwarfed by the mountain of pain. Yet for the first time, I sensed something I never truly felt in that house. Hope. Maybe they really did want a second chance. Maybe people could change. I confided in a couple of old friends, uncertain how to proceed. Some warned me that old habits die hard, that once the novelty of my return wore off, my family might revert to their old indifference. Others encouraged me to give them a chance, citing their own experiences of family reconciliations. Torn between these viewpoints, I decided to take it one day at a time. Meanwhile, Rochelle's financial troubles became more apparent. She struggled to pay off debts from her marriage. She confided that her ex-husband left her with massive bills, forcing her to juggle 2 part-time jobs. My parents helped where they could, but their savings were limited. I noticed subtle tension in the air whenever the topic of money arose. There were looks exchanged between my parents, and Rochelle's face would flush with embarrassment. Was this the real reason they'd reached out to me? Did they hope I would bail her out? The thought gnawed at me, fueling my skepticism. Still, Rochelle never asked me for a dime. She openly spoke of her desperate situation, but never once hinted that I should step in. It was all so confusing, making me question everything. My father, too, never directly mentioned money, though there were glances that seemed to say he hoped I might offer to help. I decided to test the waters. One afternoon, as Rochelle and I sat in the living room, watching a rerun on TV, I casually mentioned that I might be able to lend a hand if she needed it. Her reaction surprised me. Her eyes teared up, and she shook her head adamantly. "I can't ask that of you," she said, voice trembling. "After everything I've done, after the way I treated you," she trailed off, burying her face in her hands. In that moment, I sensed she was grappling with her pride, her regret, and the weight of her actions. I put a hand on her shoulder, telling her I could help if she truly needed it, but I wouldn't force her to accept. She thanked me, still crying, and for the first time, I believed she wasn't just trying to manipulate me. Then came the topic I dreaded most, whether I would stay or go. My leave was coming to an end soon, and I had to report back to my station. My mother grew anxious each day, obviously worried that once I walked out that door, I might never return. My father asked if I could extend my leave, but I told him duties beckoned. He nodded, understanding, though with a resigned sadness in his eyes. Even Rochelle asked if I could spare a few more days. As my departure neared, tension rose in the house. My mother wanted everything to be perfect, cooking special meals, digging out more old photos to reminisce about times that seemed simpler in memory. Rochelle hovered, visibly distressed, trying to cram as much conversation and connection into the remaining hours as she could. My father withdrew slightly, perhaps already preparing for the emptiness that would follow. On the last evening, they urged me to sit down in the living room. My mother clasped her hands anxiously, my father cleared his throat multiple times, and Rochelle fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. Finally, my mother spoke. "We know you have to go back," she began softly. "We also know we have no right to ask for anything from you, given how we treated you. But," she glanced at my father, who picked up the thread, "but we want you to know that this is your home, if you ever want it to be," he said, voice trembling. "We'd love to have you visit whenever you can, and we want to keep in touch. Real contact, not just a phone call every few months." He hesitated, then added, "We understand if you need more time. We understand if you hate us. But please, don't vanish again." I stared at them, heart pounding. A swirl of emotions caught in my throat, making it hard to speak. Rochelle gently placed a hand on my arm. "I'll spend the rest of my life making amends if I have to," she said quietly. "I don't expect you to forget, but I hope you can forgive." The sincerity in the room was palpable, and for the first time, I felt like maybe this wasn't just a facade. I drew a trembling breath, tears pricking the corners of my eyes. "I don't know how I feel," I admitted, voice quavering. "There's a lot of hurt here, but I also see that you're trying. I don't hate you, I just need time." They nodded, relief mixing with sorrow in their expressions. My mother's eyes flooded with tears. Rochelle squeezed my arm gratefully. My father looked down, whispering a soft thank you. We sat there, the 4 of us, enveloped in a fragile kind of closeness that I had never experienced under that roof before. The next morning, I packed my things quietly. Rochelle helped me carry my bags to the car, and my parents stood by misty-eyed. We exchanged hugs that felt stiff yet heartfelt. I promised to call when I arrived back at my station. My mother pressed a Tupperware container of homemade cookies into my hands, old habits of motherly fussing resurfacing. My father put a hand on my shoulder, gave it a gentle squeeze, and said, "Come back soon." As I pulled away from the driveway, I felt conflicting emotions raging inside me: sadness, relief, hope, and unresolved tension. But one emotion stood out: a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, time could heal some of the wounds. Back on base, I threw myself into my duties. I oversaw communications, trained new recruits, and participated in strategic planning. The routine helped keep my mind from lingering too much on the complexities of my family situation. Yet, late at night, I found myself replaying Rochelle's tearful apology or my parents' remorseful gazes. I tried to maintain contact. At first, it was hesitant: short phone calls, brief emails. My mother would fill me in on mundane household details, almost as though she wanted me to feel included in the daily hum of their lives. Rochelle, surprisingly, would sometimes text me small updates: how she was handling her jobs, how she was slowly paying off debts, how she was trying to salvage her self-esteem. Her vulnerability was jarring compared to the sneering older sister I once knew, but it felt strangely genuine. A few months passed. I found myself less resentful as the days went by, like a weight slowly lifting off my shoulders. I began to tentatively accept that people can change, that maybe they truly regretted what they had done. My father made an effort as well, sending me articles he thought I would find interesting about military communications and technology. It was awkward but endearing. Each call or message was another small step in rebuilding what had been shattered. My next leave approached, and I decided to visit again. This time, I planned a shorter stay just to gauge how things felt. When I arrived at the airport, Rochelle was there with my father. She looked better, still tired, but with a spark of determination in her eyes. We shared a brief, warm hug. My father patted my back as if truly relieved I'd come. The car ride home was more relaxed than before. Rochelle chattered about a possible promotion at one of her part-time jobs. My father talked about improvements he wanted to make around the house. I listened, quietly noting the absence of tension that once suffocated every interaction. It felt strange, like walking through a slightly off-kilter dream where things were too normal to be entirely real. At home, my mother fussed over me again, cooking a big meal and urging me to eat seconds. I indulged her a bit, finding a hint of comfort in her concerned mothering. Later, Rochelle and I went for a walk around the neighborhood. It was the first time we'd ever done something like that just to chat. She told me she'd been attending therapy sessions to deal with her guilt and self-esteem issues. She said it was hard, coming to terms with how she treated me. "I might never forgive myself," she admitted quietly, "but I'm trying to be better now." I was taken aback by her honesty. In that moment, I realized that while I still carried scars, Rochelle carried her own burden of shame and regret. The conversation reminded me of a passage I'd once read in a psychology textbook. Bullies often have deep-rooted issues of their own, fueling their destructive behavior. It didn't excuse what she had done, but it explained the cycle. Over the following days, the atmosphere was calm, almost pleasant. My parents were no longer tiptoeing around me. They treated me like an adult child who'd come home for a visit, not a flight risk they had to constantly appease. Rochelle was more open, apologizing less and engaging more. She talked about future plans, maybe going back to school. She asked for my opinion on some courses she was considering. It felt good to be consulted, like an equal. One evening, I found myself alone on the back porch again, reflecting on how drastically things had changed. I thought back to the day I'd left at 18, how determined I was never to return. I remembered the seething anger, the humiliation, the heartbreak. Now, I had a life, a career, and the respect of those around me. My family, once so dismissive, seemed eager to keep me around. I wasn't naive. I knew that full healing might take years, if it ever truly happened. But I felt the beginnings of acceptance, for them and for myself. I wondered if I was still holding on to a thread of revenge, a desire to see them grovel for forgiveness. But as I observed Rochelle's sincere efforts and watched my parents' awkward attempts at amends, I found that thirst for retribution fading. It was replaced by an understanding that we were all flawed, and sometimes the only way forward is through forgiveness, both giving it and accepting it. That night, Rochelle brought a bottle of wine out onto the porch, surprising me. We shared a few glasses, talking about everything from our childhood to her future career goals. She looked me in the eye and said, "I need you to know, if you hadn't come back, I would have understood. But I'm thankful you did." I nodded, feeling a tremor of emotion. I realized I was thankful, too, in a strange way. Thankful that I got to see the side of her, this remorseful, evolving person. It gave me a sense of closure I never expected. Back inside, my parents sat by the fireplace, talking in hushed tones. My mother motioned for me to join them. She patted the seat next to her, and I obliged, sinking into the worn-out couch. My father took a deep breath. "We've been thinking," he said, glancing at my mother. "If you ever want to come back and settle here, we'd be happy to have you. We know your life is somewhere else now, but—" My mother interjected, "We're just saying, there's always a place for you here. You're part of this family. We don't want to lose you again." I looked at them, their faces etched with hope. Once, I would have scoffed at this, but now, I felt a bit of warmth. "I appreciate that," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not sure where life will take me, but it's good to know the door's open." Later, when I retired to bed, I found myself smiling at the photos on the walls instead of scowling. The memories of the past were still there, but they felt more like distant echoes than fresh wounds. Time continued to flow, bringing about small but meaningful changes. Rochelle secured a better job with a steady paycheck and began paying off her debts. My mother volunteered at a community center, rediscovering a sense of purpose. My father took up small home improvement projects, channeling his energy into fixing parts of the house that had fallen into disrepair. Each of them had found a constructive way to move forward, though the weight of old mistakes still lingered. For my part, I was offered a chance to further my military career through specialized training in communications technology. It meant another relocation, this time across the country. I discussed it with my commanding officers and decided it was the right step. I called home to share the news, half expecting my parents to respond with passive approval. Instead, my mother sounded genuinely excited for me, asking questions about the training and telling me how proud she was. My father chimed in, offering to help with any logistical details if needed. Rochelle texted me soon after, congratulating me and reminding me to keep in touch. In the past, such a reaction would have been unthinkable. Now, it felt almost normal, and that was the strangest part. Before I moved, I visited my family one last time. We spent a weekend together, a weekend devoid of tension and resentments, filled instead with hesitant laughter and gentle camaraderie. My mother cooked a hearty meal, my father helped me fix a squeaky hinge on my car door, and Rochelle and I sat in the backyard, discussing her recent therapy breakthroughs. It was as close to an idyllic family moment as I'd ever experienced. On the final evening, we gathered around the dining table, sharing stories and jokes. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by the occasional smile or shared look. Finally, Rochelle raised her glass, of water this time, since she was trying to cut back on alcohol, and proposed a toast. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying her nerves. "To my brother," she said, glancing around at our parents before focusing on me. "Thank you for coming back, for giving us a chance to make things right. Here's to the future, better, kinder, and closer." We all clinked glasses, and for a moment, I felt a surge of emotion so strong it nearly brought tears to my eyes. I looked at the three of them, my once indifferent parents, my once bullying sister, and felt the flicker of something that might be true familial love, tempered by regret and a hopeful desire to be better. The next day, I loaded up my car. My father insisted on checking the oil and tires, Mother made sure I had enough food for the road, and Rochelle slipped me a small gift bag. Inside was a framed photo of us as kids, one of the rare moments when she had her arm around me, smiling genuinely. Alongside it was a new photo she'd taken that very weekend, capturing us side by side, older, wiser, and dare I say happy. "For the road," she murmured, giving me a half-smile. I hugged each of them in turn. There were tears, promises to call, lingering goodbyes that spoke of a genuine bond forming after so many years of estrangement. As I drove away, my heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. Yes, the scars were still there, but they didn't throb like open wounds anymore. They were part of my story, our story, and I could live with that. Months passed, and I settled into my new base, diving into the specialized training. True to their word, my family stayed in touch, calling regularly, sending care packages, asking about my progress. Rochelle reported that she continued therapy, found a decent apartment, and was rebuilding her life piece by piece. My parents visited her sometimes, helping with little things like groceries and errands. Even from a distance, I witnessed a new sense of closeness forming among them. Eventually, the holiday season rolled around. I received an invitation from my parents to spend Christmas at the old house. The idea felt both enticing and terrifying. My last real holiday there had been fraught with tension, overshadowed by Rochelle's snide remarks and my parents' neglect. But something in me wanted to rewrite those memories, to replace them with better ones. I accepted, and when I arrived, I found the house transformed with decorations. Lights hung around the porch, a wreath on the door, a modest Christmas tree twinkling in the living room. My father greeted me with a warm hug, my mother nearly squeezed the life out of me, and Rochelle nudged me with a playful smile. In the kitchen, the smells of a home-cooked feast welcomed me like a comforting embrace, quite unlike the empty gestures of the past. This time, the warmth felt genuine. Over the next few days, we exchanged gifts, shared jokes, and talked about the future. Rochelle wanted to enroll in community college the following year, while my father was considering partial retirement, and my mother was more active at the community center, planning to run a small fundraiser. I told them about my advancing training and the possibility of a leadership role down the line. They listened with keen interest, not the perfunctory nods I remembered. On Christmas morning, as we gathered around the tree, exchanging presents under the soft glow of the lights, I felt a wave of contentment. Rochelle handed me a card with a handwritten note about how proud she was of my accomplishments and how sorry she remained for her past behavior. My parents gave me a keepsake, a polished plaque with my name and rank, commemorating my service. Tears formed in my eyes as I thanked them. For so long, all I'd wanted was some acknowledgement from the people who were supposed to care about me most. After unwrapping the gifts, we ate a hearty breakfast together. Laughter filled the kitchen, an almost foreign sound when I remembered the silent meals of my youth. Rochelle recounted a funny incident at her job. My father teased my mother about her obsession with holiday-themed decorations, and I found myself joining in, contributing my own jokes and stories. I realized, with a jolt, that I was comfortable here. Later in the evening, as we sat by the fireplace, I found the courage to address the lingering question of our relationship. I cleared my throat and spoke quietly. I know things aren't perfect. There's a lot of history we can't just erase. But I want you all to know, I'm not going to walk away again. I appreciate the effort you've made. It means a lot. My mother nodded, tears shining in her eyes, while my father gave me a solemn, grateful look. Rochelle grasped my hand briefly, a silent thank you. We each had our own regrets, our own secrets we'd never fully articulate, but in that moment, acceptance flowed like a gentle current among us. Outside, light snow started to fall, frosting the lawn and bushes. The fireplace crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Rochelle leaned her head back, eyes closed, a slight smile on her lips. My father poked at the logs, sending sparks up the chimney, and my mother sighed in contentment, sipping cocoa. I gazed at them, these people who had once been strangers, or worse, adversaries. Now we were a family, imperfect, but learning to care for one another. Yes, I had been bullied by my sister, ignored by my parents, and forced to leave home at 18. And yes, they suddenly wanted me back in the family years later, after I had achieved independence and success. I had every right to shut them out forever, to watch them suffer under the weight of their own regrets. But in choosing to return, to offer them the chance to make amends, I discovered something even more valuable than revenge. I discovered the power of forgiveness and the possibility of transformation. Perhaps it was a gamble. Perhaps people might say I was foolish or too soft. But looking around that living room, filled with warmth apologies and an unspoken promise of better days, I knew in my heart that I had made the right choice. In this fragile reunion, I found a happiness that I once believed was impossible. And if this holiday was any indication, our story was finally heading toward a place of hope, understanding, and yes, the kind of family love I'd long been denied. The end, for now, was a happy one, a testament that even after years of hurt, it's never truly too late to try again.